Hey, Michelle, what are we doing today?
Hey, Maddie. So today we're going to talk about a shocking comeback story in the world of college admissions. Rick Singer, he's back. He's the guy behind the Varsity Blues scandal, and he's back in college consulting. So, if you remember, he basically masterminded a scheme that helped rich families basically cheat their way into elite colleges. He went to prison, and now he's out of prison and says he's ready to help students. But this time, he's going to do it legally. You can see the skepticism on my face. So, ready to talk about Rick?
Absolutely, and everything that comes from that. It's a big story. Let's do it.
Yeah, so let's start first with a recap of the Varsity Blues scandal because this was a while ago. This is like 5 years ago. So for anyone who might need a refresher, so Rick Singer, he was a college consultant. He basically kind of created like this side door for clients who are willing to pay rich families to get into elite universities. So, and his clients are like wealthy parents, celebrity parents, and they wanted guaranteed admissions for their kids. They didn't care if it meant lying on applications or faking athletic profiles. So Rick was all over this. And so he didn't just like have connections to get these kids into the universities. He also had like this whole underground network. So he had like coaches, test administrators. He even had his own fake charity that was funneling money. So he made like $25 million. And the scale of this wasn't just like 3 or 4 parents. There were over 50 different families using him. There were celebrities like Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman. So this was a big thing that went down. So we didn't know each other at the time. So I'm just curious, like, where were you kind of in your whole career? And like, what did you think about all this when it went down?
Sure. I entered this career path, college consulting, in fall of 2019. That was my first year. And before I was college with Mattie, which was a year and a half after, I worked at a tutoring center in Cupertino, California. So I got a job basically as it was a similar job, but I was on Indeed or whatever, and just got a random job. I had not really engaged with the college admissions world before then, and I believe this Rick Singer stuff all went down around 4 or 5 months before that fall of 2019. It was like mid
Hmm.
2019. So I entered this realm with that being the big story in college admissions, and
Interesting.
it was so it was funny because it was basically like when people I mentioned I was a college consultant, they'd be like, "Oh, like that one guy from like that." That's really what it was. And when I would talk to my bosses or anything about it, I'd be like, "Yeah, this guy's insane,"
Hmm.
and it was insane, especially at the time because I was, like, working in a crappy tutoring center and had no power whatsoever and was barely knew what I was doing. So the idea that there was a supervillain out there that was pulling all these strings was baffling. I guess then I went on to become, I suppose, I would say powerful consultant in my own regard. I don't know if it's a weird term, but, like, I'm definitely closer in at least prestige or ability to Rick Singer than I was then. However, it's still insane. Like, it's still, like, absolutely nuts. And quite honestly, Rick Singer is one of the I'm sure there's many examples, COVID-19 is why Rick Singer and this whole story went away. Like, that's my big memory of it, is that
Mm.
this was all building, there was court decisions coming, and then in early 2020, COVID happens, and I believe pretty much there's a lot of the story was pretty much wiped off the front page because there were bigger news stories. And by the time it was settled, and they made the Netflix documentary or whatever, it had kind of, like, run its course, and that's why there weren't a ton of consequences for a lot of people, I think, for this whole story, is because a much bigger news story got in the way. Like, that's my take on Rick Singer in general. But now he's back, baby. He's like Rick 2.0.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Like, what do you think, at the time, what stood out to you just about like the scale and the scope of like this whole operation that he had running?
At the real time, well, I wasn't even really aware of it when it first happened because I wasn't in this industry. Then there was a 6-month period in which while I was working, I was like, "That's pretty nuts," I guess. What I really came to understand it is when I became a private, really honestly, higher paid college consultant myself, like the year or 2 after, and my big takeaway was that I could not do this if I wanted to. Like, that was, like, the scale and scope of what he did. Old school was kind of a mindset, something I kept thinking about it, that Rick Singer was a deal maker. He was a hobnobber. Like, he had the ear of very powerful people. That's not my game, you know? Like, I
Mhm.
what it really reminded me of is this has always been my theory of what you get when there's a lot of different college consultants out there, and some are there's like a tier above, honestly, what even I do, which is like the like truly to the stars. That's what Rick Singer separated in, and we're talking six figures, even seven figures, like that kind of stuff. And what you get with those kind of packages, I would assume, like A, is they kind of like raise you, you know,
Mm.
it's like you basically, they like for like 4 years, they are your parents essentially, and like they turn you into this uber mensch, and I didn't want to do that. But
Hmm.
the other is that they themselves are power brokers, that they are the people who can connect you with, like, say, like the dean's exemplis. If you want to pay $10 million to Stanford, like these consultants know the correct and maybe like official channels in which to do things like that. And Rick Singer operated in that world, which A is, I guess, I probably maybe like a tier level above what I handle, but
Hmm.
also, even if never what I wanted to be doing or feel I have the capabilities to be doing. That's not my skill set. I am not a natural like wheeler and dealer. I don't know power people and don't really, I don't, that was never going to be my ability in this realm. It's actually why I think I more and more started focusing on what I am good at, which is writing and strategy work, and I guess meeting families and getting to know them. Because, and that's what I think led me to, is like heavily specialize in actual college the actual application work. I meet mostly late juniors, and we begin work before the senior year, and we actually do the application together. And that's what this podcast is about, is the actual application. When I've dipped my toes in other aspects of college, like particularly in like high school counseling. You know, you're a sophomore or a freshman,
Right.
and it's never gone nearly as well, because I don't have those connections, and I think that's where connections are more powerful. I'm not able to get students into lab work or get them a nonprofit, or connect them with any particular group that's going to help them with their resume. That's not my skill set, like, in the first place. It's also not what I focus on, and that's why it was always kind of a weird thing looking at Rick Singer, is like, it's not looking in the mirror. It's like just looking at an alternative reality of this, of like what a college consultant can even be, and I guess how that one can go bad.
Right.
But it's difficult to then link back, I'm not one step away from being the next Rick Singer. I don't know how to do that. You know, like I'm many, many, many steps away. It's not that it's beyond that I wouldn't do those things. I couldn't. I don't know how to.
Yeah. And what do you think? I mean, his methods are just so questionable, but yet so many families were drawn to him. Like, what makes you go after a college consultant like that? Is it access, privilege, power, prestige, all of the above?
So yeah, I wrote about this a few years ago. It's on my website, and my big takeaway is, like, Rick Singer's a jerk, but he's a very talented jerk. And often the case, it's almost like corrupt politicians or corrupt businessmen or corrupt any like corrupt people. They tend to, they weren't always like that necessarily. It's like
Mhm.
that's kind of my idea, is in order to have the ability to be so like evil and horrible and you generally have to build that on a often somewhat normalized or just like coherent business. Like,
That's
I don't think,
exactly what he did, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I read both his books. They're okay. Like, he's a big brand guy, so I expect that. And probably the thing that always jumped out to me reading it was that, like, over and over, students reported liking him quite a bit,
Mm,
and I found that pretty interesting, that he wasn't this, like, domineering jerk who was threatening kids. And
right.
like, how they talked about him was similar. Like, I like to think my students talk about me, you know, it's like he really cared, and he was really smart, and he had a lot of really good ideas. It seems like it was more he was pushing the parents, like, on the back end, to do a lot more of his nefarious schemes. And if you look at, like, the line of Rick Singer, he basically, like, slowly but surely, this is the part that's not that dissimilar to what I do, is he began to see the vulnerabilities in this process itself.
Yes.
He chose different vulnerabilities that I think he could kind of find ways to exploit on his own end. Um, well, and also had people take the SAT for his students. You can't do that. Like, that's not exploiting vulnerabilities. That's just cheating.
Right.
But yeah, like, a lot of what he really seemed to focus on was the unbelievable, like, added allowance that schools have for students who are recruited athletes. And I know of that, and occasionally I get a recruited athlete and enjoy the fruits of that, like, pretty weird way of how generous they are. But that was the vulnerability that he really went after, that he was basically having students pretend to be recruited athletes, or was bribing these coaches to let them in. And I would never do that, but also I couldn't do that. And I do think about that. It's like, well, I think heavily about vulnerabilities in these essays and like what other students are doing wrong and like how we can utilize different spaces like this information or different essay works like on these applications, or who I could bring in like you to like make sure that every aspect is like you too is like how can we exploit like the title function of the extracurricular sheet. That's for another episode, but it's like stuff like that. That's us playing the game, you know, and like
Right.
that's so it's hard for me to sit here and just be like, I would never like in any way try to exploit vulnerabilities in this process. Like I do that shit all the time. I just do it in
Mhm.
my own way. It tends to involve the written aspect of it, or me hiring people who have their own ways to do so. And uh, to the best of my ability, nothing that we're doing is illegal or involve like insurance fraud or anything or bribery.
Right.
It's
But the
and
process is kind of unfair.
yes, this process is unfair. At no point in this entire podcast are we going to describe the college process as equitable or fair, or
Mhm.
I will describe it as decently done. You know, like I don't inherently think this process is corrupt or evil or terrible. I think it has vulnerabilities, and it
Yes.
is the nature of it's hard to run an admissions office. It is hard to take 100,000 applicants and grind that down into under 10% of them, and to do so in a 6 to week period often. Um, that that is a challenging, and to do so usually when you're not funded enough, quite honestly.
Mhm.
That leads to these schools having to make decisions that guys like me, like I understand Rick Singer's game. Like I know why he did all the things he did, and like and often when we go really in depth on like how the money was working, I kind of lose track because that's so far beyond how I understand this process. But it's the mindset behind it that like it is about exploiting vulnerabilities. Like that is what Rick Singer did, and he also had people take the SAT for his own students. Like that
No
goes beyond
bueno. Yeah,
yeah, but that you could still that's still exploiting vulnerabilities in the SAT thing. Like it is
that's
the same.
true.
It's the same mindset. It's like, well, what can you do to get an A? A big one is that he had his students get diagnosed with learning disorders in order to get more time on tests. Like
Right.
that is a great example of exploiting vulnerabilities in the system. I think that is not. That's not illegal. That's not just cheating. You know, the SAT stuff is just you can't do that, and bribery is just wrong.
Yeah.
But that really does seem like it was a staple of his methodology, and that's why I find it interesting that his students liked him because
Mhm.
my students like me and they like us, you know, like, and that's important for both of us that our kids have a good time. But also, yeah, I made you laugh. Is like when you're having them stuff more content detail into the titles of their extracurricular sheet because that will get like that is not us having them just like express themselves
Yeah,
and do their
exactly.
best. That is us playing this game, and
Right.
you're way nicer about it, but, like, part of why I wanted to work with you is, like, you do get it, you know, like, we are trying to get into college here.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again, I have been on consultations with families and a lot of, like, really into women, and the fact that I'm like, "Yeah, this is a game, like, we're trying to get into college here, like I said, we're gonna do it." That is extremely attractive to them. Like, that is a hot like, that is part of my sales pitch, what I'm
Interesting,
saying
yeah.
here, and I might dress it up, like, a little bit nicer, but the fact that I do see it, like, this process that way, I've had multiple students who are like, "Yeah, that's why my parents liked you," you know, like, that's like
Mm.
and maybe that's just convenient because that is how I see this process. You know, like I want to be the best at it, and I like the writing process, and I like the kids. But the actual college business process, I do just see as like a series of pieces, and some of them are easier to play with than others.
Yeah. Do you think, like, the scandal made parents maybe, like, more savvy because they kind of saw how you can, kind of expose those vulnerabilities and take advantage of them?
That one's tough for me because it happens right before I enter this world. So I don't have a pre 2019, and honestly, much of a pre COVID understanding of college admissions. Because that was that if you read I certainly if you read the news articles coming out of that, it's a lot of like, "Our phones are ringing off the hook. We've had more people than ever come," and I think a lot of that is kind of blustering. I think college consulting was doing fine in 2018 and 2017 and 2016. This is not a new profession. I think what families are interested and willing to pay for has shifted a good amount. Like honestly, the removal like test optional and the
Mhm.
removal of UC SAT acceptance, I think has moved the needle as far as college consulting more than any Rick Singer stuff, and probably more than COVID at this point. And that I believe now a lot of money that used to be dedicated out to standardized testing coaches is now well that the money still exists, and this now the essay guy like is interested like that has probably been the biggest movement I think that the schools have made as far as affecting our and other consultants' ability to like find work. Yeah, I y- I just feel, yeah, it's hard for me to tell. I would have to have been there beforehand. My
Hmm.
guess is that people who wanted consultants, like people who were going to hire someone knew who they were before this. This simply like maybe blasted into the foreground and also gave a perspective of just how much these people can do. And that's something I want to get to is a goal of this podcast is to make it clear that like we do things like
Right,
consultants
right.
like we are expensive and we like we are brought on for a long period of time, and I promise you it is not just what you find on Google. Like that is
Yeah.
like there is more. Yeah, I'll circle back to that because that's just a personal rant, but
So now, okay, so he basically cooperated with the FBI, so he got his sentence reduced. He was convicted, and then he spent 16 months in a federal prison. Well, actually, it was a federal prison camp. He's out, and he says he's reformed. And he told the media he's done with like living in the gray. So he's gonna be like above the board now. And he has a new website. He's actually operating it from a halfway house. So that's where he's like serving out the rest of his sentence. And he says, "Yeah, I'm dedicated to helping students, but honestly, this time, and I'm also gonna do like career guidance for students who maybe don't have aspirations to go to college." So, I mean, do you think he's reformed? Is he really gonna be on the up and up?
I have no idea. I maybe if only so far as Rick Singer, I bet, is a good college consultant. You remove anything he has done or his ability to do anything that is, well, patently illegal or even highly dubious in nature, and I still think he is going to be pretty good at knowing how to get a child into college or a teen.
Mhm.
Insofar as I have my own flavor of this process, and I talk at length about like, and I my own things I focus on, the FLL, the writing styles, what have you. But a lot of that is simply based upon my a core understanding of how a student gets into schools, and a lot of people, and like I I pretty much take pride that my core philosophies on this process are not insane. They're not like completely different than everyone else's. It is about like what I emphasize to students and how I think I do it does match a lot of other people. And I again, Rick Singer has two books. I don't think they're in print anymore, but I got hardcovers of both. And what they're heavily about is about building a brand throughout the application. And I maybe don't use like such terms for it, but that's
Mhm.
something I understand is like having a cohesive message of who you are and what you're interested in. Um, and I picked up a lot of it was based about like backing up their major stuff like that. Like is
Interesting. Yeah.
similarly, Rick Singer is still has a lot of connections and he's still able to run a consulting company in the first place. Like he has people who work underneath him. Like he's old school. He has a full
Yeah.
corporation that a lot of that thing still works without the illegal part that he can probably charge a lot more money for.
Mhm.
And then, well, yes, because I think the guy has a client list is
He had people contacting him while he was in prison.
yeah, because he's good, like, because he
Yeah.
gets kids into school, and, like, I bet the vast majority of every Rick Singer client, it works exactly the same as it does with you and me, and that a family who either just found knows about us one way or another, found this podcast or found some writing, or more likely heard about us from someone else, and then was basically forwarded some stuff we've done. Be like, yeah, like you check this out, this makes sense, and
Mhm.
there's a combination, and then the combination of that be like, we should try these people out. Then they did a consultation, and I bet Rick was a likable, like friendly elder gentleman who was like who talked about weird brand things and what have you, and also had just like I have a collection of T-shirts and thing on my website, like had a trophy room, like was able to display his results
Yeah.
in a way that attracted these clients. And they're like, yeah, and often his clientele were pretty wealthy people who desperately wanted their kid to get into college, and this is the only time, this is their only chance, and this guy seems to be the best. Like that's why Rick Singer got these clients, and that's why he probably will continue to do so because he's still damn good. He still has like he still. That's why it was very important that like his kids like him. It's like that was
Right.
the one line I kept reading is that his students liked him and thought he was a nice guy or what have you. So I found that very interesting. It's because he was probably good at his job. Then he allowed that to maybe that's my take as a little person. I'm surprised he had to do all those things, I guess. And maybe it's because he wanted to enter a tier above what I am currently in. Like
Mhm.
you and I like we're pretty high up there as far as like honestly our costs, but also like the game we play. We were in the deep end with these students, and there is a tier above us, and I know that, and I can throw
Mhm.
out some names, but they tend to be larger firms or like mid to large firms that have well, they're the ones you read about, you know. It's like
Yeah.
they're the ones they get it's usually some dude who's like, I'm not gonna describe who the person looks like, but it's like, yeah, it's like this consultant charges $600,000 to tell you the name of 3 schools, yeah,
Right.
that is the tier above us, and I don't know if those guys are like, it's marketing in of itself that they're so expensive, but that's above us. And yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure what goes on between my current tier and that one to get there. Maybe Rick has to be more comfortable coming back down to earth, more where we sit,
Mm-hmm.
in order to do so. But it certainly does not shock me that he's getting people calling him interested, if only so far as there are still friends and family of the kids who got into college 4, 5, 6 years ago that are just as desperate and just as much willing to pay the means to get it done.
I was gonna say, what does that say about this process? What does it say about our society that people are literally calling a guy who's in prison for a college admission scandal to help them with college admissions? Like, what is wrong here?
That people really want to get into Duke is what it says, Michelle. We work with clients, and this is something I wrote about in the piece. Is I do not suspect that the majority of Rick Singer's clients were like terrible monsters. Insofar as the majority of clients we work with are not terrible monsters, neither the students nor the parents. I really like the students. They are all different. They all have personalities, and their parents tend to be anxious to a fault. Is probably the most common problem. It is not that they are certainly never bringing up like ideas that involve breaking the law. Like, and nor do they seem terribly interested in me presenting them.
Mhm.
However, if I were to do so, it really a lot I use is like, please trust the man in the white coat over here. Is like when I'm working with students, I am guiding them through this writing process. That's primarily what I'm doing. And there's a lot of stuff I just tell them to do it. You know, just like when you're doing the extracurriculars, you just tell them to fill in this title, yeah, and they just do it because it makes sense to them. They don't expect nor ask you for it. It's like, why are we doing this? Is not much, and also is like, isn't this like taking advantage of a vulnerability in the formatting of this Excel spreadsheet we're filling? And you go, yes, child, it is. Like, it's like, but like, there's not a lot of those questions. I have found that students don't like lying, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I'm a creative writer, and I tend to get, like, I err on that creative side is like, I speak openly about being authentic and not making things up, but I'm also a professional writer who knows how to make stuff up and make it seem authentic. Like, that's part of the game.
Mhm.
And when I bring that stuff up, students, they don't like it, you know? Like, similarly, they're very proud of the fact that their work is what they really believe in, and what they're
Right.
really doing is the these are not a bunch of like little sociopath monsters that have no morals, neither are their parents. And that's why I feel like with the Rick Singer stuff, it's like there's a real slippery slope. Is that like
Mhm.
these families buy in and they don't really know this process. And again, like, Rick's nice to the students, and
Yeah.
it gets very easy to be like, okay, so like, here's this problem. I bet like cheating with the SAT is the most blatant one, but the kid's like not able to pass the SAT. The kid's like, okay,
Yeah.
so here's what we're gonna do, you know, and I'm sure he kind of broke down. It's like, yeah, we have a guy, you know, it's like, you're just gonna just sign here, or just do whatever. And y- I could convince these families to do all sorts of stuff, if only because they paid me a ton of money, and like really have put their faith in this process that's inherently opaque and confusing. Um, yeah, like I'm just shocked that he did it. You know, that's
Yeah.
still at the core. Is I'm shocked that there was actually a dude that was pulling the trigger. I guess the SAT cheating is one thing, but like to go as far and wide as what he was doing, that is more shocking to me than the fact that he was able to convince parents to do it, I suppose.
Well, especially, like, how do you convince them to have a fake athletic profile?
Yeah.
That's pretty egregious. And I just wonder, I mean, he says he's reformed, but he's exploited these things before. So what's to say he's not, like you said, fall down that slippery slope again when one student maybe doesn't get in next year when he's above board. And so he says,
Yeah.
"Oh, wait, but I had that side door. Maybe I'll
Right.
try that again."
What happens when Rick is suddenly not having the results he was used to?
Mhm.
Because I think our results are very good, but they're not perfect, you know. Especially at your tippy top level. And that's why the sports stuff makes so much sense. Is I've seen firsthand just what an unbelievable advantage being an athlete is in this process.
Mhm.
And I've really come to understand like how it really does go around the normal application process. I call it a side door because basically athletes get in like a different process than normal students. It's still through the admissions office, but they're basically being judged against other athletes on a very small list of potential applicants, much
Yeah.
more than they are being judged against. And that school knows, like, well, X% of this list gets in, so you just have to be better than the other athletes, which tends not to be that difficult if you also have a full consulting arm behind you building you up.
Hmm.
Yeah, like there's that is maybe how you have a list. But yeah, I had 4 Harvards last year. I had 2 Stanfords. I had that is not possible in modern college admissions as I understand it. I yeah, like that's and those results, maybe that's what you can charge to get that level above me. I don't know what Rick's gonna. I kind of get he'll be okay, like he'll still. That's the key is I don't think with that will. It's weird that he's back. He's old. Like he's like Vince McMahon. He's just retired,
Yeah, he's
dude.
like
Like
64, I think.
yeah,
And yeah, so now he's saying like, "Oh, I'm gonna give you hands-on support and reasonable fees," whatever that means. I mean, like who is he trying to what kind of families is he trying to recruit here?
probably the same families that were gonna sign with him anyways. So the siblings and the other people from schools who like is the whole referral game is a bit strange in college consulting because I don't. It tends to be don't ask, don't tell when I meet families like how they actually met me. They'll always mention they saw my stuff. I mentioned this podcast, but I get an inclination as I continue on my career. More and more of them somehow they know I existed from someone else,
Mhm.
and I don't dig into it because they don't seem to be that interested in prying that knowledge. But the nature of what else does is often when a student gets into a great school it's often a lot of other families or parents want to know, well, A, how that happened. B, the line I've heard is like, who did you pay? This is a line of that leads to that.
Mhm.
And Rick Singer, one way or another, does have a trophy room. I guarantee he has had unbelievable results. How much of that is because he like cheated and broke the system,
Yeah.
and how much is but he's been doing this for 20 or 30 years. I imagine that just like I'm 6 years in, I am very proud of my results, really without like breaking any laws as far as I know. Like he has just like he's old school. He has roots in I think it seems to be primarily Southern California.
Mhm.
I I'm not shocked that people still there are people who plan to sign with me multiple years ahead of time. They read my stuff and they're like, okay, when I'm a senior, I'm like, this is the guy. Um, I assume there are families that have been planning to hire this dude for 5, 10, 15 years for whatever reason.
They're like, "When you
And
get out of prison,
right,
put us on your list."
right. And if I go to prison and get back, it would not shock me if I'd probably try to bury it, but I feel like it would still show up on my doorstep. It's just like sometimes like the same reason that this process is so like you can charge so much from what we do is because families are really desperate for this to work. Like
Mhm.
we are all in a way like parasites on a much bigger boulder, a much bigger process of college admissions, and it is competitive. It is hard to get in these top schools,
Yeah.
and families do desperately, for whatever reason they may be, desperately do want their children to get into either like a specific school or like really a tier of schools seems to be more common. And I guess like yeah, that's not easy. And I myself have like pretty much dedicated my entire life to figuring out how to do so and been rewarded for it. But there aren't that many other people that are actually good at it.
Yep.
Like that's why I have my shirts in the background. Like that's why is my results are very clear on my website. Like I know what I'm doing. Like here's what I do. And I assume Rick was a similar type of guy. I guess I feel happy that I have not had to go to that realm in order to get the results I want. I do so with my own skill set that Rick may or may not have. Like I don't know how I would love to read the essays of a Rick Stinger student. I think I'd be fascinated. My guess is they'd be like he has an essay guy, and my guess is like there are like a lot of essays I read, which is polished but a bit like hollow, extremely polished but not that interesting and somewhat hollow.
Mhm.
But obviously knowing what they're trying to convey, but no red flags, nothing inconvenient because that is what I tend to read when looking up like the essays that worked, like looking up the high level things. And often when I'm reading those things, I am thinking about the consulting firm that worked on them because like that's the style.
What do you think about his prison sentence, by the way? Like 16 months?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's basically like at a camp. Now he's in a halfway house. He still gets to like do college admissions work.
Well, okay, at illegals, he committed fraud, right?
Mhm.
And It's a weird thing because as far as I remember it, he basically as soon as like taxes got involved, like that's really what he got busted for is like running like a tax fraud operation. And it's weird because yeah, it's like he was defrauding universities for quite some time with fake grades and everything like that. And
Right.
in theory, like if you're like defrauding a private, it's such a weird like how do you sentence that? Like it's what is 16 months accurate? And yeah, I guess he should have gone to prison. I assume he went to like a club fed situation.
I
I don't
think
think
so,
he
yeah.
probably
It was like a camp.
yeah, I doubt he was in there with like murderers and everything. But
Right.
um yeah, it sounds about right. Like I think he should have gone to prison. Like what he did was bad. He orchestrated a massive fraud operation to get kids into college.
Mhm.
It's such a weird crime. Like I don't even know how you sentence
Yeah,
a
like, who are I mean, there's not who are the victims? We don't know, like, who wasn't admitted because of what he did, and
right. And I'm not the right guy to be able to just because you know like you get it's not probably the closest comparison would be a guy on Wall Street who's committing fraud, and I
Mhm.
think that I can understand why that seems to be mostly why he and how he was sentenced was for the fraud stuff because that actually has a connection to the real world. It's like how do you punish a man for yeah for cheating to get a kid into college? It's
Right.
such a it's what I think of when I call the process Monopoly Junior. It's like the little everything is like the real world except for 17-year-olds, and it's all yeah. There's like a seesaw and a Ferris wheel related.
Do you think, like, him being back, after serving that sentence and everything, is it I mean, do you think there's gonna be, like, damage to the college admissions industry, like, with consultants? Is he giving the rest of us, like, a bad name?
If he is, it doesn't matter. I think any damage to the integrity of this profession is if it was going to happen, it would have had by now. And I think Rick Singer has mostly gone away COVID, you know, like that was in 2019, if I told people I'm a college admissions consultant, they'd be like, "Wait, like that one guy who like cheated?" And I'm
Right,
like,
right.
I go, "Yeah." Then COVID happened, and since then, it's back to people just having no idea what I'm talking about because this profession is confusing. Or people think I work at a high school and I'm a counselor, and then I get mad at them because
Yeah.
like, "No, I don't work. I'm not. Don't you dare call me a high school counselor. You could compare me to a criminal,
So
but
he kinda got lucky. Yeah, he kinda got lucky then, because his, like,
I think
reputation
he
is
did. Yeah,
yeah,
and you know who got lucky with these schools? I think Stanford got lucky. I think USC
that's a
got
good
lucky.
point, yeah.
I think they were thrilled. Well, they weren't thrilled by COVID. That's the what I'm trying to say. But it really was pushed off the front page because the
Mhm.
time, like I believe it was as the trial was about to begin, or like it was basically about to be the next chapter. COVID hits, and the entirety of it was basically swallowed by that much larger story. Then there was a I remember there was a Netflix series that came out that
Yeah,
also
mhm.
but that was by that point people had kind of moved on, and now him getting out is only news to hear on our college admissions podcast. This is not a front page story of anywhere. Uh, but yeah, these schools are just as lucky because, and I am kind of like I feel kind of bad because we avoided any sort of sanctioning for this. You know, like college consulting is a fake job, like you are an associate consultant because I gave you the title, just like I'm a college consultant because I gave myself that title. There's no real legislation, there's no restrictions, and that was that was kind of what people were worried about inside the industry, if I remember correctly, like where I was working,
Mhm.
is like we're worried that that they're going to make this harder for us because they're going to basically put sanctions or restrictions on this industry because of this. Then COVID happened and it didn't, you know, like there wasn't like that's pretty much my memory of how the story unfolded. And I don't know what will at this point, you know, like this was the big chance for college consulting to go under the microscope.
Yeah,
And
and I was gonna ask you, like, do you think it should go on should there be, like, more oversight, regulations? Do we all need a background check? Or,
I hope
do
not.
we need to be, like, vetted by somebody?
There are associations like the IUCA
Okay.
and there are basically college consultant like guilds, I guess. They're not unions because there's no real protection, but they're these groups. And in theory, and there's a college there's a UC Berkeley class in college consulting which I took and didn't have the best opinion of. In theory, there's supposed to be these like guardrails or ways to become a college consultant that are official or to
Right.
feel like a real consultant. Um, but then entering the real world, actual clients don't know or care about any of that stuff. You know, like
Yeah,
they give you there's definitely some bonus marks if you worked at a school as an admissions officer, but that's because they think you have an edge. That's because they think
exactly.
you'll be better be able to help them. And I don't have any of that, so instead basically market or play up what I am good at, which is the writing and the strategy stuff, and that's good for them too. The,
Mhm.
it's these families are not going to you in order to for any bigger reasons that they really want to get into college. And
Right.
should there be restrictions? I mean, that's also why I brought back like ChatGPT. Like, I certainly don't want them to be any restrictions. Like, but that's
Yeah.
bad news for me. I like this process just the way it is. If anything, I wish there was more. I wish there was more essay content, which is kind of like that's been the big shift in the last 10 years, the push towards more essay stuff. I think partially because people were gaming the extracurricular aspect with like fake nonprofits and everything like that. Is
Right.
it's hard to separate the nature of what what's actually going on here with what I like about it, which is heavy influence on basically essay writing and like personal reflection and theme building throughout an application is very important right now, and it's not a coincidence by companies doing well with that exact type of content. So yeah, I guess to say it should have been because of this process. I don't know. I think schools should honestly, I think at the school level, it should be better checked out. Like a lot of this was due to vulnerabilities in the athletic recruiting
Right.
that allowed basically kids to sneak in through this second thing because the admissions office that usually has their hand on it like wasn't paying that much attention. Should there be stuff? I suppose so. I don't know what it would be exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like the one I hear is that there should be some way you have to indicate that you work with a consultant or like how much they cost, stuff like that. That one makes the most sense to me. I think obviously Rick would have just had his kids lie in this
Right,
scenario.
right.
Um, I don't know how I'd react to that, but that's probably stuff like having students write their essays in person.
Right,
I'll say
that's true.
whenever I read these regulations, my immediate mind goes like, okay, how would I counter? What would my game be? It's like, well,
Yeah.
I would then be training students how to write these essays ahead of time and then having them go in and do them, and then I would feel dirty about it. But it's hard to separate what's good for college students, what's good for America, and my actual business I run that relates to this process.
Mhm.
And the current process is pretty good for me. Like there's not a ton of stuff that I have to worry about on the back end. It's like it's mostly theoretical, stuff, like not getting caught or what have you. Like the writing is not being too, and I only put one period. I only put one space after the period. So like I'm not worried about that because apparently that's the only way you'll know. So
So for like parents and students who are listening today, they might be feeling, I don't know, like paranoid or, how the heck do I find somebody who is on the up and up? So like what advice do you have for vetting college consultants or like finding them, making sure they're ethical? How do people avoid like not getting scammed?
yeah, it's that's a real question, and I will say that I my problem with consultants, I think most consultants are bad, not that they're corrupt. Like I throw a lot more shade at other people's industry for not knowing what they're doing or not
So
having
less
the
about
mindset.
like getting scammed and more just they're just not good.
Yeah, I think you should never hire a consultant that doesn't offer a consultation, a free consultation. Like I think that it's a very real purchase, and like any big purchase or big professional, they should have the decency to talk to you for a half hour and answer any questions you want. You should talk to multiple consultants. And they should be good. It's like and you should have a list of questions, and it should be pretty clear by the end of that consultation exactly what you're paying for and
Mhm.
what they plan to do. Because my guess is that with this Rick Singer feller, he had students longer than I did. I had them for about 6 months working. I think he was working with them like in high school, but it seems very unlikely to me he was on a consultation with these families and be like, and then we're gonna have some guy take your SAT for
Yeah.
you, and then we're going to,
Give
and
you
then
a fake
yeah,
profile.
right,
Yeah.
we're gonna put you on the face of a buff guy and how do you like that? That's silly. Um, I think yeah, it's your right to be like, okay, so what is the plan? Like, can you draft it out? And if they can't, well, don't trust them because either they don't know or they have more nefarious plans.
Mhm.
And I think honestly, like they don't know is going to be more common. Like the big problem with college consulting is that this whole thing is like shrouded in mystery and allows people who aren't very good at it to put on their own college shirts and look professional. Like that's where a lot of that is another goal of this podcast is like here's what I actually believe and like here's the type of conversations you could have with me IRL. Like I want that stuff at the forefront
Yeah.
because most consultants instead have a basically an air of like I like pay me or F off. It's like I know everything. You have to pay me to figure it out. And I don't think they do. Like I when I originally got this industry, I was kind of I fell for that trick. I was like, everyone knows what's going on except for me. And then I had to build an entire individualized, like elaborate system in order to figure out how to do this correctly. And I just don't
Mhm.
think most people have their own system. So really take advantage of that consultation. And if you Yeah, it's basically have like know what the plan is and know what you're paying for, and being willing to walk away and find other people is very important. Similarly, I think you should only want to sign with a consultant that they're the one actually doing it. I think a lot of this is you don't actually get the consultant you're working with, you get like a salesman, and that was the case at
Oh, right.
where I worked. A lot of big firms is you get some guy who will tell you anything you want to hear, and then you sign the bottom line. Don't fall for that, and if it is basically if you really are doing like you want to move on, because I think I and other good consultants are not just going to do that. We're going to have a plan. We're going to explain what's going on, and we'll certainly do our best to allot for like whatever your concerns are, or explain them what we're going to do. But it's different than be like, yes, of course, we'll handle all that. Like there should be a clear cut plan and description of like how it's going to get done for all the things you most want done. Like that's probably what we want to focus on, and if they and talk to multiple people,
Hmm.
and I think a lot of people do this, and quite honestly, I think that's why people often end up with guys like me who are a lot more expensive than their people they talk to, because I'm able to do that. I think
Right.
the advice I am giving is not crazy to a lot of people. It's already what they do, and that's why I recommend talk to them and like go with the good one. And I guess like I know that because I usually am the most expensive option. People do go with me because I can do all these things. I was like
Exactly.
yeah, and that's why I imagine Rick also was just good at his job, because it's hard to imagine that he was bringing up these ideas. Instead, on his conversation, he probably came off as very knowledgeable and very, because he was, and had a lot of good results and could talk about those things. And then one way or another, he ended up basically going too far. And that's probably my biggest problem with him is I imagine he was lying even to his own clients when he met them about like how he planned to do this. Like
Yeah.
that's probably because yeah, that's him taking advantage of his own clientele. And by that point, they trusted him and they bought him, and that's probably why they went along with whatever he wanted to do.
Exactly. No, I think that's great advice for parents and students, to help vet college consultants and also maybe double check and see if they were in prison for anything, especially college
I
consulting.
Clean record. I was last background checked. I worked at Nintendo selling things at the mall. I got a full background check for that, and smooth sailing, baby. So,
I think we both passed the background check. So
anything else before we finish?
I think we've had our fill of Rick Singer today.
Yeah, and this is an introduction. Is the college consulting world is itself complicated, and I do want a part of this podcast at least to be Eddie and Willie to talk about our actual profession, because I think it's somewhat fascinating, and I guarantee there, if nothing else, some parents out there who find this world fascinating, if only because you did, and then you now work at
Mhm.
it. Yeah, so I encourage, especially like parents out there, to like to if they have questions about how this world actually works, like that's the type of stuff I like talking about, because there's really no that content does not exist anywhere on the internet. It's like what it's actually like to be a college consultant, and
Right.
it is a fascinating, confusing, very satisfying, but also I guess like I can't remember. It's a weird job, but I love it, and I want to talk more about it. So we'll do that next. We'll do more of that in the
Can't wait
future.
till next time.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching College with Mattie. For more information or a coaching session with Mattie, visit collegewithmattie.com. You can follow College with Mattie on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Tune in next week for more episodes, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.